So today we're launching a project that has been at least 3 years in the making. The EMPA Principles are designed to be foundation guidelines for all of us as practitioners and researchers, and they put into words the vision that EMPA has for emergency communications in all its forms. So we're going to have a panel today to discuss how we developed the principles. A lot of you are involved, and we thank you all, but also to delve a bit deeper into what the principles are, what they look like, and what they mean for our practice. So we've got a panel of people who were all major contributors to this process, and all are EMPA Fellows. Bob Jensen is the Senior Managing Director of Strat 3 LLC and is an internationally respected crisis and risk communicator and former US Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Public Affairs for the Department of Homeland Security. His experience directing comms programs including before, during and after Superstorm Sandy, the Haiti earthquakes, and in the White House for the National Security Council. Glyn is based in New Zealand, an experienced communications manager who's worked in central and local government, the private sector, and for NGOs. He is Marlborough's District Council's communications manager, covering a large part of the northern part of South Island. He's an EMPA Fellow and helped to establish EMPA in New Zealand in 2013. Rebecca Riggs is our Australian representative on the panel. She's a specialist communicator, lead trainer and managing consultant. Her work includes development of plans, systems, policy and procedural documentation and training in crisis and emergency strategic communication. She's a crisis emergency communication manager, meeting facilitator, spokesperson, and creator of narratives in crisis and disaster. We also have a video from former director of EMPA, Anne Ledbetter. Anne is well known around Australia for her work in recovery. She can't be with us today because she's on an advisory panel for a new group that's got a national focus. So we'll watch her video shortly. I'm Barbara Ryan, I'm the chair of EMPA, and let's get started. So a question, sorry, Adrienne, if you could play Anne's video right now, that would be great.
Hello, EMPA family and friends. My name's Anne Ledbetter and I'm a fellow and former director with EMPA, and I'm so pleased to be speaking with you today. For more than a decade, EMPA has been identifying great examples of emergency communication and bringing together researchers and practitioners from around Australia and New Zealand, and indeed from around the world, so that we could learn from their work and their experience. And learn we did. So many inspiring and insightful presentations over so many years really helped us to understand what does and doesn't work in emergency communication. I think it's true to say that we really did grasp the vibe of great communication, but there was something more. We needed to really distill the core characteristics that underpin this important work. The EMPA principles of communication represent the passion and collective wisdom of so many people, which has been gently and expertly curated by the amazing Rebecca Riggs into 7 core concepts that together contribute to outstanding communication. These principles can define the way that we practice, the way we learn, the way we legislate, and importantly, the way we evaluate communication before, during, and after emergencies and disasters. Like our children, we should love all our principles equally, and I really do love them all, but if I had to pick a favourite, it would be, perhaps unsurprisingly for those who know me, Principle 3, community-focused communication, and that first line, people are our primary focus. Communicating with communities as equal partners and collaborators, communication that engages with what people are likely to do rather than just what we want them to do, and seeing the community as a resource and not a problem to be managed. These ideas are critical to our success. I'm so pleased to see the EMPA principles being launched today, and I commend them to you as valuable tools in the life-saving work that you do. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anne. We really appreciated Anne being able to put that forward because she was such an integral part of the development of the principles. So a question for Beck, who drove this whole process. Can you explain how you were able to get to this point?
Well, the principles really are the distillation of literally hundreds, if not thousands, of conversations. Some of them formal, some of them informal, some of them online, some of them in person. It started with a great big meeting at a conference in New Zealand with 8 fellows around the table. And we talked a lot about what was central to the work we did. And we talked to the themes that eventually became the principles. What I love, and subsequent to that, many other people have been involved and offered ideas and offered feedback. I took the principles to the EMPA conference in America and had another amazing conversation with American practitioners who are quite different in some ways to the Australian and New Zealand ones, because the systems of disaster and emergency management and communication are different there. Different people fill the roles of emergency communicators. But even so, the guts of the job that we do is the same wherever we do it. And whatever our training is and whatever our degrees are or our background is, we face the same challenges and we need to hold on to the same thing. That became evident. That what I love about the piece is there are quite literally the exact words of a number of people in the document. So it wasn't a whole lot of interviews and then I wrote it. Literally, I know the bits that are Anne Ledbetter. I know a couple of lines that are Bob Jensen's. I know some ideas that belong to Glyn. I know some ideas that belong to you and other people. And it literally is the voice of a whole lot of opinionated, expert and deeply committed people on the page. And I love that the edges aren't rubbed out. There's a lot of individuality there. Sometimes when this sort of process is done within an organisation, so much has to be cleaned up and edges need to be rubbed off or controversial things need to be taken out so that whoever the manager is can feel comfortable with it. In this case, there wasn't anybody like that. We agree. We hold these truths to be self-evident. And in many ways, that's the thing I'm proudest of.
Thanks, Beck. So let's have a chat with the panel now. I'll start with Bob. What made you see the principles such as these so important to our industry? So what drove you to contribute so much to their development?
Well, I'll tell you what, both in America and then other countries I visited, communication didn't seem to have what we call in America doctrine, right? There wasn't like, this is how we do things. Whereas, you know, I worked for the military for quite a while, and there's military doctrine. It kind of underpins the foundation of how they do things. And communication, several things always hit me. When I first went to FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, I dealt with a lot of much older emergency managers who looked at me and went, yeah, you guys, you deal with the media, you know, they just didn't take us seriously, and it really pissed me off because I said to them, listen, what we do is just as important as what you do. And then, of course, I had some search and rescue guys go, well, we save lives. And I said, well, you know, if we get the right kind of information out, we save lives too. I also let folks know, how many of you have a call with the White House every day? None of you. I go, but I and the team on the communicators, we talk to the White House every day, because communicating with the public during a disaster is one of the most important things that a government can do, because not only do you have to say what you're doing, you have to maintain public trust and confidence. So I got involved because I wanted to say, here's a way for us to start to really put down in a document the basics or the doctrine of communication. And that's why when Rebecca and you all asked me, hey, could you be a part of this? I'm like, well, of course, this is fantastic. I wish we'd do this in America. We haven't done this in America. And I hope I'm going to take this document and share it with all my friends here in the U.S. because it's really a great foundational thing. And of course, when I'm going to jump ahead because I know you're going to ask, well, what's the one thing you really kind of hold on to? And you heard me say this over and over and over again. Communications is operations. And I say that to emergency managers who are like, I heard, I'm not going to name the state, but I heard in a certain state that communicators weren't allowed in the emergency operations center with the real emergency managers because you leaked to the media. It's like, oh my God, I wanted to slug people. But it's like, okay, no, we're part of the process. The whole reason we do emergency management is for the people. Sure, you're going to save some buildings, that, but really it's all about the safety of the people. And how do you do that? You have to communicate. And we are the ones who communicate with the people, with the public, with stakeholders, with all the different people, whether it's the government or the members of the legislature, the media, etc. We're the ones who are communicating, and we have to work very closely with the operators and translate what they're doing into things that the public can understand, so they can have confidence in the government that they can do stuff and things are going to be okay. Number two, get the right information so that they can make the right decisions. And so that's why I love this project, and I was so happy to be asked to be a part of it. And it's so fantastic to see that it's coming to fruition. And I looked at the final document, and it's fantastic. And I thank everyone who's been a part of this, because this is leading the world. Other countries don't have this.
Yeah, it's very exciting. So Glyn, what's your what sort of brought you to the table on this? What made it really important for you?
Well, New Zealand was, I guess, the Christchurch earthquakes of 2011 just sent our nation into a shock. And those of us that were working in central and local government realized we had no, as Bob just described it, doctrine. How do we get communications at the table, the seat at the table discussion? And it's still an ongoing battle, despite all of the disasters that we've faced here, both in New Zealand, Australia, and the US. You're still dealing with a whole group of people in a response in an emergency with their own specializations who do not understand our specialization and what we can bring to the table. So one of the reasons we brought EMPA over to New Zealand and established it here was really to start building that community of practice and to start sharing all the great learnings that we were picking up, and to try and get some kind of training and programs underway to help all of our people. And I'm very pleased to say that EMPA has had a huge impact in New Zealand over the last 8-9 years. And for me, this document is the culmination of a lot of conferences and a lot of meetings, a lot of people like Bob coming to New Zealand, a lot of international thinking. That's what I love about these principles. There's a whole lot of different nations, people involved. And to me, I see this document as putting on a suit of armor. This is a suit of armor for our comms people who are currently struggling in entities and organizations and trying to get their voice heard. I'm currently working on an emergency here in Marlborough where we are really struggling to get our voice at the table. There are many agencies involved. And this document I'm going to be sharing this afternoon with the 4 senior people that are running that emergency recovery. And I'm going to be stamping my foot on the ground and saying, we need to change the way we are managing this recovery. We need to do X, Y, and Z. A number of things in this document we are not doing well at the moment, and I'll itemize what they are. So for me, Barbara, this is an absolute watershed document for not just people in the communications field, but also all of those other disciplines that we work with. This is going to take us a step forward. And I think it's the beginning of a learning process for a whole lot of people, not just the communications discipline.
Yeah, it's hard to quantify how much these words on the page are going to make a big difference to our field, I think. And Rebecca, I haven't asked you this question because it's you sort of half answered it in your introduction, but what made me, I might just alter the question slightly for you. There must have been a trigger point for you to think, right, we need to do something about this. How can we put something together that will help our situation in emergency management operations? What was the trigger point for you?
Maybe it's a tipping point, not a trigger point. But I think I had heard so many good people having the same experiences, facing the same challenges. And we say, you know, comms is ops, or certainly Bob does, and now I do. And we all know what we can achieve when we do our job really, really well. Sometimes we're not given the space to do that. If we have a mechanism to clearly articulate our position on things, if it has weight, if it has agreement, then we can, as Glyn just said, come into the room and say, look, I'm not just asking for this because I want more work to do today. I'm asking for this because it leads to these three absolutely necessary outcomes. We can say this is good practice, this is principled practice. One of the things that I have told a lot of people in teams that I'm working with is we are more than just spoons. We do not just pick up information, carry it somewhere and drop it off. That is the least we can do. The most we can do is find out which of that information is essential to the people that we're talking to. As Barb said, not just what we want them to know, but what they need to know, what they want to know, what their framing or their experience of the event is. If we refocus into what we need to do, we will shift how we do our job. I think for me, that's really important. In emergency communication, you can get so busy and so rushed that it is easy just to be a spoon, just to get accurate information from one place and take it to another. I want to do more than that, and I want to enable anybody else who wants to do more than that, so make the argument that we can.
Thanks, Beck. So we probably should go back a step and describe what the principles are. We're going to put them on our website on Friday, and we'll put them up in the chat as well later on today. And
should we read out the principles? Because I'm seeing in the chat that people are saying
sure
they'd like to, you know, can they read it?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so we'll also put them in the chat so that you can have a look in detail. There are 7 principles. The first one is seat at the table. It's a manifesto for how the systems and structures need to be in place for communication to work well within the operational field. The second one is about strategic messaging. So it's all about connection and credibility, and really how we work hard to connect with the people that we need to connect with. And, you know, we recognise that there are differences across the communities that we're trying to connect with. The third is community-focused communication. You'd think that would be a no-brainer, but we see around the world instances where that's not the case, especially during COVID. The fourth one is creating connections and really integrating our efforts across a range of channels, across a range of agencies, really making sure that we take every opportunity to get the messaging out. The fifth one is creating networks and connecting stakeholders. This is one of my favourites. It's about recognising that disaster affects whole communities, and within each of those communities are multiple communities in their own right. It's really fundamental to effective emergency communication to recognise that. The sixth one is working with media and social media providers. So really liaising around collaboration rather than what Bob was just talking about, you know, the them and us story that can sometimes pervade the operational approach. And the seventh one is building teams and creating capacity. And you really see this in the recovery stage, where there are groups amongst us within EMPA with lots of experience within recovery, but then we go out to communities that might only experience a disaster once every 10 years and they find themselves reinventing the wheel. So building that capacity around every aspect of our communication. So Bianca's put the principles up. Bianca, can you also put up the summary document? That might be easier for people to read. We'll have them on the website and we'll put them up on Facebook as well if you're on our Facebook page. So that leads to the next question. Which of the principles is your favourite? Start with you, Glyn.
I've got to say at the moment it's seat at the table. I mean, I'm sure I would have a different answer if you asked me each of the next 7 months, Barb, but I think communications practitioners can find it very intimidating, and Bob touched on this earlier. You're dealing with a bunch of people who really know their discipline, and you've got to elbow your way into the room, and that's really hard, which is why I go back to my comment about this being a suit of armour, this document for communications practitioners, particularly not necessarily junior, but you know, those guys and gals who are halfway up the tree and they're suddenly thrown into perhaps having to manage an emergency, and how do they get their voice heard at that table? And to me, that is so critical. And if that is not happening, nothing is going to go right at all. So I very much, and I love the fact that it's number one, Barb, because I do think it should be number one. Thanks.
How about you, Bob?
Well, I'm going to say the same thing because y'all have known me since 2009 when I first came to speak at EMPA in Melbourne, and I was somewhat of a evangelical, right? I talked about the fact that maybe communicators have been a little too passive, like, oh, we're support people. And which kind of says we're secondhand citizens, and I saw that in America too, and I just got a little fed up with it because I thought there was a kind of a, and I'm going to use the word arrogance among the emergency managers about what communicators do. Oh, you little people, you talk to the media, I got really fed up with it, and I said, you know, we are an essential function in emergency management. When you look at all the functions of emergency management, communication with the public and stakeholders. So it's not just, you know, it's not just media engagement. And that's part of the problem too, is we as communicators have had to evolve away from the notion of, oh, we are media people, right? That's all we deal with. And yes, it's very important, but as we all know nowadays, the media are less and less channel that we communicate with the public, because now we're dealing with them directly through social media, through SMS, through other means, and the media is, yes, they're very important, don't get me wrong, but that's not the only way we talk to them. So it was something of kind of a, like in the US, I had to kind of kick people in the butt to say, stop being submissive, stop saying, oh, we're just here to support, and you know, they're the bosses and we just do what they say. Like, no, we actually have to step up and say, you know, you're talking about a certain plan X, Y, or Z that you think is going to be the way to go, but it's going to have massive negative public reaction. So we need to say that before they do something stupid, right? And you know, that's a whole different game, because because when you're talking about a seat at the table, the incident commander, whoever it is that's running the response operations, they need someone they trust, and they need someone experienced. They need someone willing to say, hey, that's a great idea you think you're going to do, but here's what's going to happen. Are you willing to take that kind of negative public response? And we all know, we've seen time after time where, you know, the most well-intentioned responses have happened, but maybe they didn't kind of think it through. And then there's like the cascading effects of negativity. And that's where we as communicators say, hey, we're kind of really focused on the public, and we're getting feedback. So it's not just a one-way street. We're hearing back from the public, and here's what they're saying, and they're a little pissed off. So that's where I think we have to really kind of rethink our role and reimagine ourselves. Oh, and stand up for ourselves and say, we're not just support people. We're just as important as the guys out there with the hoses putting out the fire, or the search and rescue. We are saving lives, and we're helping the future. So that's unfortunately, for too long, communicators have kind of been relegated to the backside, the back bench, and I think we need to be right up there with everyone else. So that, and y'all know me, I'm pretty vocal, and people in America know me too, because they either like me or hate me. So.
Thanks, Bob. Beck, what's your favourite one?
Well, it is a little bit, as Anne said, it is a little bit like choosing a favourite child. I feel guilty to all the other ones, but look, sort of connected to what both Bob and Glyn said, if we want that seat at the table, which I do, I think we need to be and show people that we are rigorously strategic. So strategic messaging is mine. Connection and credibility, I'll read it out. Effective disaster communication requires a rigorous strategic process. We need to do far more than transmit accurate data. We must understand why we speak. We must understand those we are speaking with. We must listen to ensure that we have been heard, understood, and believed. And do you know what? Right now, I'd put listen first. I'd change the order of those three. Yep. If we need to listen first. We need to know what is happening around us in order to say the right things. One of the amazing things about social media over the last 10 years, it has given us a mechanism to listen. Sure, we can use it to speak. Sure, we can put stuff up on it, but most valuably, we can listen. The incredible work that is being done in communities to uplift them and support them and give them information is also a brilliant mechanism for us to listen first. And so when we listen first, we then can be strategic. We know what is happening around us, and then we can work out what to say to make it better. So I need to do an edit, put listen first. And, you know, I because of the way that we do strategies, write strategies or write plans, we tend to, even if we put it in there, put listen and assess last. You know, we do this and we do this and then we do this and then we measure if it worked. In a way, we should, every strategy, every plan that we're doing should have listen up the front. Otherwise, how on earth would you know what to say?
That's right. Yep.
And if we're good at this, then we will more easily get a seat at the table. Then we've got something to carry to the table that is rigorous and clear-cut and very, very useful. And then we can make the argument that we deserve to be there. Yes. I'm just maybe a little bit more bolshy than Bob, which is
I think reflecting on that, Beck, I think we probably are victims of our own success too, because if we're successful, then the results are not visible. If we're a failure, then that's when everything becomes It's just all thrown out there, and it becomes very public. So I think you're right. We need to be able to document exactly what the situation is before we start, so that then we can show that it's a different situation when we finish.
There's been some incredible sort of advances over the last 3 or 4 years about measuring what we do. When I started working in this space, people would measure outputs. So we did this many posts, we did this many newsletters, we did outputs. But really, to measure what we do, we need to measure impacts. You know,
That's right. Yeah.
85% of the people weren't evacuating. We did this, and now only 25% of the people aren't evacuating. We need to know why we're speaking and measure our successes in that way. I think that's really important, and really important so that we don't waste our time. None of us ever have enough time. So if what we're doing isn't getting what we want, then we have to shift it and do something else.
Yeah. And Glyn, I just wanted to go back to something you said earlier. You were talking about a community of practice, which is really timely now that we have our vision statement for the organisation, which is all about building community of practice. So how did New Zealand sort of hit on that so much earlier than the rest of us? Because this is not number 5 and number 6 in terms of, 5 and 7 in terms of the principles. So 5 is creating networks and connecting stakeholders, and 6 is building teams and creating capacity. So were they 2 that came out of New Zealand, or did it all sort of morph? Did we all come up with the same at the same time? The same thing at the same time?
I think in New Zealand, we're a relatively small country, as you know, 5 million people. We have to rely on each other, you know, in our different regions to a great degree, because some of the disasters we've been through have been very large scale, and there's no way that those communicators in one area could deal with that level of disaster. So I guess that's been driven to a great deal by the size of those disasters versus our number of communications practitioners in the country. But at the same time, I think EMPA has also, through its conferences, has got out there and brought more people into the fold and improved the understanding generally about the need to build those connections. And frankly, I think, and we've talked about this, Bob and Rebecca, at our conferences, is the need to have that regular face-to-face. You need to know the people that you're working with. You need to build relationships within the teams that you have, including with the media and all sorts of other elements of a response. And so really we're all in it together. And I think I would suggest that's probably the same in most parts of the world. We do have to rely on each other. And I guess COVID is probably the one that has brought all of us together in New Zealand on one national cause, if you like, one national disaster response. So that's probably been the ultimate disaster that has brought us all together, quite frankly.
Beck, you were talking about how your perspective has changed a little even since we published the document. And I'm looking at the principles and hearing your conversations and realizing that the principles weave in and out amongst each other a lot. How did you come up with the order of the principles?
That is not the first order that they were in, and you could certainly argue for other orders. And I think I socialized the order. In fact, the initial chunks came out of quite a lot of conversation. What are the central parts of the work we do? I just wanted to share, interestingly, Glyn, the teamwork one was really mentioned by a lot of New Zealanders. The create your team, look after your team, actually did. I know, it's not that Australians didn't talk about that, but it really was repeated again and again and again by our New Zealand compatriots, which I think is interesting. And it might come from being small and knowing that you have to weave together quickly and well for it to work. I don't know, but I do know that that's where those ideas really stemmed from. The order, I think it was just ultimately what my gut said, except that looking at it again, I noticed that we've got sit at the table and be strategic. And of course, it's all about the community. And then we've got a whole lot of ones that are really about connection. And
right.
so is communication. And I think in there is even the line, disaster and emergency break things. And they do. They break relationship, they break built environments, they cut roads, they cut telecommunications networks, they break families, they break things. And one of the best and quickest ways to build things is through relationship, and that is communication. So I love that actually the idea of connection is just repeated over and over and over again. The connection between the media and social media and communicators. Seriously, when I entered this space, over a decade ago now, there was almost a kind of a push-back rivalry. That was the narrative that was being told. And I've noticed, and I'm so pleased, that over the last decade, the flaws in the media are not the point of the conversation. It's how can we work best to build those relationships, to build those integrations, to enable them to join us in saving lives. And what I found is when that offer is made, media and other social media content creators are really delighted to do so. There's not many people when made that offer, can you please help us save people's lives? Not many people say, no, not today. I'd rather do something facile and stupid. Mostly they say, absolutely, we're going to step up and we're going to do this. So that is one of the important things. I'm not at all sure I answered your question, Barb. But I think that probably is the order. We set things up by being strategic and by having a high-level relationship operationally. And then we live up to that by having networks, connections, relationships.
Okay.
There we go. I came to an answer eventually.
A really quick one before we get on to some questions from our participants. Bob, you've worked in a lot of different environments around the world in sort of crisis and disaster. Outside the US, Australia and New Zealand, can you see an application for this type of foundation in communication?
No, absolutely. Because what we're talking about here, these are foundational principles upon which to build, right? And different cultures can take these same foundations and build different constructs based on them that meet their cultural needs, right? And so because we can't be so set upon like, well, everyone should be like us, because they're not. I deal with Africa, I deal with the Middle East, I deal with a lot of different. I'm working right now with North Macedonia, and things are very different. And yet, at the core, the need for communication to the public and to key stakeholders, and I separate those two, the public and key stakeholders, about what's going on. A, what is the government doing, but B, what is the situation, so that people and the key stakeholders can have the right information to make the right decisions on their own on what they need to do is no different, right? And the differences are our culture, language, environmental situations, and technology, right? And so I deal with countries like Djibouti, where they just don't have the technology. They're and yet the need to communicate to the people about what's going on is exactly the same as in the United States or in Australia or New Zealand. It's exactly the same. They need to let people know, and they get it, they understand it. My biggest thing about this is that these are, after really kind of discussing a lot of things, I think Rebecca and the team, all of you, have really come down to some really core foundational ideas that can be built upon. And this document should not be an end-all be-all. It should be a living document, right? It's gonna evolve, because let's face it, we all are communicators. We know that 25 years ago, our role was defined by the media, right? We were media officers. Well, because at that point, the only real clear way we could get information out to the public was through the media. Now, we all know that has completely changed. The internet started to change everything. Social media has thrown everything out the window. And as communicators, we have to evolve too. We have to recognize that people don't get information the same way they did 20 years ago. And, your people are walking around with, Apple phones, and they're looking like Dick Tracy, they're looking at their watch, they're getting their email. 20 years ago, no one would have ever imagined that. And so as communicators, we have to evolve, and that's the problem I see, because I got to tell you, many places I go, whether it's in America or it's in other countries, the communicators are stuck in 1970. They still think, well, my main role is to talk to the media. Okay, that's great that you do that, but you know that you're going to miss most of your people, because, like, for example, in America, 50% of the population don't get their information from the news, the media, the mainstream media. They get it off of social media, and we have to change. And if communicators who are dealing with emergency management can't evolve and can't kind of shift over to give people information of where they want to go to get information in the way they want to get it, then we're going to fail. Well, we put a press release out. Well, bullshit. I'm sorry. That's the least effective tool that we have. We have to recognize that with technology, we have great opportunity, or we can fail, right? Absolutely fail. I just think that's what's great about these is these will help anywhere in the world. In fact, I'm going to steal this and I'm going to share them with my World Bank clients around the world. And you guys will be, you're probably getting calls from Africa and Middle East. Hey, this is great. So I think you all, I'm so pleased to have been a part of this, but just the initial part, but all the many, many, many people who put effort into this, you've done a fantastic job, and this is going to be really make a difference for communicators around the world. So that's my 2 cents. So.
Thanks, Bob. Got a question from Channel Alan about the AIMS Australian Inter-Service Incident Management System framework. Most of the states in Australia operate under this now, and it has a public information function now where it didn't have to start with. Do you feel like we have a better seat at the table now? Beck, you're the Australian and you've worked under the AIMS framework. What do you think?
I wanted you to answer this one. Well,
I'll have a go when you finish.
I think it's better than not being there. So to be recognised as part of the operational effort is, of course, essential. So absolutely, I think that is changing. That there is more. Chanel's just said, don't want to be difficult. No, be difficult,
well,
Chanel.
We can, because we work outside the system, Chanel.
Yes,
so
yes, no, and it's all good. And I think it's a really good question. There is some stuff in the principles about systems, and you'll find that as Bob said in the chat, there's NIMS system in the US. There are similar ones in various European places. What's your one called, Glyn?
SIMS.
SIMS.
CIMS.
So we've all got them, and they're similar, and they're a really good start. And the more that public information is there, I guess the actual name public information makes me a little sad, because information, it sounds like we're a notice board, or like I was going back to before. Accurate information is essential, but we do a lot more than that. And when the focus is on merely getting accurate operational information in and out, I think it minimises the work we do.
I think it's very vague, and we still rely on the personality of our incident controllers and how they view communication as to how well that public information function is incorporated into the response, particularly, but also the other phases. We've got some work to do on that, and I think that that the principles will maybe help us get a seat at the table next time the AIMS is discussed and revised, because that too is a living document, as is evidenced by including public information into that. It's a pity Peter's not here, because he could wax lyrical about the shortcomings of the AIMS system in terms of communication. But yeah, Rebecca says, good point, thinking beyond media partnerships and how not to dilute the message via social media platforms. She sees local politicians particularly creating their own posts using government information. How do we ensure people know where to go to for source information? How do we make sure they go to the right channels to get, virtually the horse's mouth? Now they have access to the source information.
If I can, I'll briefly jump in. I mean, it's just, and I'm sure Bob and Rebecca will have a view, but obviously you need a single point of truth, a single source of truth, and you need to make sure everybody knows where and what that is, and you communicate it to death, basically. Bob.
Yeah, so I'm going to jump in here to say that one of the challenges that emergency management in particular have, and communicators who work for emergency management have, is that they focus too much on what they're doing during the response. Oh, we get ready, we got to practice, we got to exercise, but they don't think that the time to really set the situation, to set the expectations, to get people to understand where to go for information is not when the disaster is happening. People are a little upset, they're a little busy. The time to do it is during the downtime, during peacetime, and this is where the public education efforts and the community outreach. Barb and Rebecca, you guys have heard me talk about whole community approach, and which is going beyond we're going to only talk to you through the media, which I think is great, but it's the least effective. We have to be working with the community during peacetime to say, hey, if something bad happens to you, what kind of information is most important to you? We have to ask them what they want to hear, and then how do you want to get that information? Where do you go? And so we can't just say, oh, this is where we're putting the information, you have to come here. That's pretty arrogant, right? And so yes, we're going to put the information here in our emergency management website or whatever the hell we have. We also have to say, oh, but the community has said to us, here's how we want to get information, and we want it here. So we have to put that in our plans to make sure they get it. So, and this is very important with the multilingual, multicultural. In New Zealand and Australia and America, everywhere is getting a lot more multilingual, multicultural. And those are the most vulnerable populations many times because, hey, they don't speak English. If we only put things out in English and we put it here on the emergency management website, that none of them will go, hey, I better go check the emergency management website and see what's up there. Well, they can't even speak English, so what good is that? So we have to stop being government-centric. You guys have heard me say this. We have to stop being government-centric and start being community and survivor-centric. Where are they going? So also, hey, you know, there's a disaster, someone's lost their house, they don't have a TV to watch the news, or they don't have their computer and internet connectivity. They're probably getting this stuff off their smartphone, hopefully. So we need to be putting information where they're going to get it, when they want to get it, and how they want to get it. Is that a lot more work? Yes, absolutely. But that's the way we have to evolve to be more effective.
Yep. No, I completely agree, Bob. And we had to pull together a table of all the different channels we're using. We've got 5 different stranded communities here on this response I'm working on. And it was a long table. It took up 3 pages of all the different pieces of information we are placing in different places. So you're right, it's not a single source of truth. It's going to where it's needed. But of course, you have to counter that misinformation, and there's a lot of that out there, and a lot of rumor. And obviously, as you say, if you're going to where the people want you to be, you are going to counter that mis and disinformation.
I think I've seen a change from, well, maybe I'm being hopeful, but I believe that I've seen a change from people saying we've got to shut down those other people talking to we've got to build a network with those other people talking, because that actually does a lot more for us. I know that there was an amazing woman who set up during the bushfires in Australia, and she really just wanted to help, and so she set up a helping social media platform. And fortunately, the government authorities, the government comms people made a relationship with her. So, and she was very happy to share their information. So rather than shutting her down, they just gave her good information to share.
Yeah.
The more we do that, I think the reality is people are going to look in a lot of places. They're going to check. I know you've done some research about this, Barb. People check with friends, with family, listen to radio, look everywhere. And the more we can spread our information through those networks, the better we are.
Yeah, I've seen that happen on social media, where you've got a really effective Facebook page, community Facebook page that everyone is on, and then Queensland Health tells them that they can't have the information because it's not an official page. And yet there's a recovery process starting at that point that Queensland Health is needing to get involved in. And I do think I probably shouldn't have named the agency, but I do find
name names.
Health agencies tend to operate outside an emergency framework, and we're seeing the results of it now. It's a real shame.
I want to talk about that. I want to, because right now we're in the middle of a massive global disaster called COVID, right? And the health networks have not normally been integrated into the emergency management, and emergency managers are like, oh, we don't do disease. Well, now you do, right? And so this should be a massive learning experience for every government globally, that you know, they should be looking at all hazards. And when we say all hazards, it's not just, you know, floods, fires, earthquakes. It's also health hazards, because when you got something like a pandemic, and this one has shut down the world economy, right? It's shut down travel. I mean, this is massive, and wow, the messaging globally is horrific, and we've done a crappy job in America. In fact, I just wrote a chapter of a book on how not to do crisis communication. Let me use the U.S. experience during the start of COVID of all the things you shouldn't do in terms of crisis communication, and we did it, right? Just horrific. Anyway, I'm not going to get political here. Everyone knows what I think about our past president, but I got to tell you, this is the time now where emergency managers and the health management have to get over their little turf wars, right? And say, look, we don't want to take over what you're doing, but my God, we got to work together, and we have to have a single system, right? You know, we're seeing that in the U.S. where we thought we had learned the lesson during H1N1 many years ago, and we kind of had things going, but we just kind of, it's like we forgot it all during COVID, and now we're in America. You know, we're 680,000 dead. That's just unexcusable. That we should, as a nation, we should never be there. We shouldn't have been there, but now we are. And you know, it's interesting when I look at the figures from other countries who we consider, well, you know, they're a third world country. They're not. They're actually doing much better than we are. And part of it is the communication, and part of it is the thing that we're all going to deal with from now on, is countering disinformation. That's a fundamental function of emergency communicators that we never had to, well, we dealt with it before, but it was really kind of a nuisance, and now it's a major function. Now it's going to take over a lot of, we better have a whole unit that just deals with disinformation. And that's sad. That makes me very sad, but it's a reality. And I talk to countries and major corporations around the world, and they want me to talk about three things: cybersecurity, countering disinformation, and you know, how do we deal with that, and then how do we do a better job of understanding emerging threat? Those are the three things I'm asked over and over and over again.
Thanks, Bob. We're running out of time, so thank you all for joining us today. I've just got to thank a few people who couldn't be here but were really critically involved. They put in a huge effort, and it would be remiss of us not to mention them. And that's our former chair, Peter Reekers, Carl Ferguson from New Zealand, who's also one of our directors, Lee Cowan, who's having a baby today, so she couldn't come, and also another of our directors from New Zealand, Michelle Poole. Massive effort, but there are so many other people that we haven't named that also put in a lot of feedback and recommendations and their ideas into this process. So thank you all for joining us today.